Cineboys to Cinemen, episode 5. Episode 5.
Hello.
Hope you're well, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Feeling a bit sniffly today, all the last couple of days. Yeah, Jesus
Christ.
Jesus Christ. So just as a little disclaimer, if you hear any sniffling or gravelly throats, then you know why that is. This week, we are going to be discussing Darren Aronosky's. Is that it? Aronosfky?
Darren Aronosfky.
Aronosfky, yeah.
I guess.
Aronosky's, yeah.
Just call him Darrenovsky.
Darrenovsky, yeah. Darrenovsky's The Whale. His claustrophobic chamber piece about the many manifestations of trauma. It's a film that, I must admit, I came out of the cinema and was sort of not sold on a lot of it, but kind of swept up by its intentions. And since that point, I found myself actually thinking about it a little bit more negatively every time I think about it.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I sort of not the opposite, but I came out of the cinema thinking that it was good, but it had a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And then I thought I need time to sort of digest all this. And then my opinion of it, like yours, sort of lapsed somewhat. But then in the kind of days afterwards, I've got a bit warmer to it again, slightly. Yeah, I don't think I've been won over by it like I am with some of his other work. But I do keep thinking about it and the kind of empathy and all that kind of stuff, which we'll get into a little bit more. But I'm a tad warmer on it than I was initially.
Well, that'd make for an interesting episode then, because I think by and large we've pretty much agreed.
Yeah.
And I did think that the other day, like we're just basically agreeing with each other, which is fine.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think it'd be nice to have a little bit of a separate ideas on the film. The podcast before that, of course, has a topic of discussion which leans into the film or relates to the film, as you should be aware of by now. With one of the central themes of the film being isolation, we thought it'd be a good place to discuss the topic more broadly in cinema, around certain categories that we've sort of cherry-picked.
Okay.
It's going to be a good one.
Lovely stuff.
Enjoy.
Questing the cinematic void.
Okay then, so here are the aforementioned categories around the theme of isolation, because that's what we're going to talk about for a little bit before we dip into the film.
Nice.
So we're aware that there are lots of different ideas that can be explored through isolation.
Yeah.
And initially we had loads of different categories, but on the basis of the fact we want to keep this podcast, we don't want to take up too much of your time, basically.
Yeah.
more than we had sort of already allotted with our sort of previous run time, so we sort of narrowed it down. So I've got technological isolation.
Yes.
Isolation by species, which works in a sort of sci-fi context, and we'll discuss that later on. Out of time. So isolation through maybe having like a dated ideology or a dated belief system, or indeed sort of
even age.
Exactly. So that'd be interesting. Some good films in that section. And we've got cultural, socio-political isolation. So the experience of that through the lens of class, race, immigration. And then finally, isolation through trauma, which will lead nicely into a discussion about The Whale.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
beforehand, a little discussion about the Joker, because I think there's a lot of parallels here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So let's start then with the first one that I mentioned, which is technological isolation. Okay. And the film, I think that certainly more recent releases that does that best is Her. Spike Jonze's Her.
Yes.
I believe you wanted to kick this one off, Ben.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Just start by saying that I think it's a really wonderful film. Very breezy, I think, is the right word, considering it's about quite a hefty subject matter. Like, if you try to explain the plot to someone, and then they sat down to watch it, they'd probably be pleasantly surprised by its sort of humanity. Because, at face value, it's about a guy falling in love with his operating system.
Yes.
But actually, it's that classic thing about you get presented a sort of synopsis, but the film is actually about something else entirely, which is basically about Joaquin Phoenix's character and his loneliness and how he kind of navigates this sort of futuristic landscape with a new companion who shows him his own humanity. But through that, because of the nature of the relationship, she starts to sort of, I guess, drift apart. They sort of drift apart, and she has she becomes sort of more sentient through him. She realizes that she sort of no longer needs him, and it's heartbreaking. But as an illustration of isolation, it's really nice, really unique. And if you haven't seen it, I'd recommend it highly.
Yeah, I think there's a real sort of, what you said about it being sort of breezy. I think it's almost a facade in some ways, that breeziness, because I think Johns is sort of unafraid to take those themes into darker territory.
Okay.
And I really like that about the film. But I also just like the sense of humour the film has.
Yeah.
And I particularly like the way in which he sort of threads the technology into the themes of the story.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that one of the most common things that's been said about the film is that it's not totally unbelievable, is it? Really?
No.
I mean, a lot of sci-fi does centre on this idea of, being in sort of far-reaching galactic locations and locales, but often the most impactful sci-fi films tend to have like a sort of anchor point in something familiar and relatable to us. Yeah. And that's not to say that films about spaceships stuff can't.
No.
But in these sort of sprawling urban metropolises.
Metropoli?
Let's go with that. I like that. Metropoli, which is already a place of great loneliness. You blend in amongst the masses, but it's been exacerbated by the over-reliance on technology.
Yeah. It's funny because, like, I think with her, I expected it to go in such a different direction. Like, I expected the film to explore how society reacts to his unusual new girlfriend, basically.
Yeah.
But actually, the film goes in totally opposite directions. It illustrates that all of society is changing in the same way. And he has an actual, like, he does have a friend in it, and at some point there's a confession by him that he's experiencing the same feelings towards his own OS. And that was such a lovely moment in that he has found common ground with someone else. And really, I feel like, despite what you might think that his reliance on something created by humans would make him more isolated. It does the opposite. It actually brings him closer to other human beings, which is really disarming, surprising way of going about it.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of like the thing you said about you expect everyone else around him, the other sort of human characters, to judge him for this sort of the way in which he develops this romantic relationship with computer software. But it sort of reminds me of how like 10 years ago, if you saw someone walking down the street talking with their headphones in, you would have thought they were mad. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like
totally.
now, everyone's doing it. It's that sort of. I know it's kind of different in the sense that obviously people are still talking to other people, but it's this idea that technology moves so rapidly and so quickly that it drastically sort of has a drastic impact on the sort of our behaviour and what we expect to see in the sort of our social norms and the way we interact with one another. I really like that, and I really like the idea that the technology is supposed to sort of simplify our lives. So initially it sort of presents this as sort of like escapism. Yeah. The idea that this technology is supposed to be easier, because it's implied that he obviously had a relationship before with Rooney Mara's character. I forgot her name in the film.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I think
that didn't work out for whatever reason, or a reason that's eluded me because it's been so long since I've seen it. But it's just this idea that the technology is supposed to make it easier, and then it just becomes like any other relationship, which is just as fraught with the complexities and the difficulties that you have with people.
Yeah. I didn't think about it like that, actually. Yeah, because obviously, we have things like the Google. It's not you have like Alexa and Google clocks and stuff you can talk to now. Yeah, and at this point in time, it does make things slightly easier. It's weird, like the other night I literally just sort of wanted to try it out, and I said, "Hey Google, play like relaxing forest sounds." Did exactly that, like immediately. I was like, "Oh shit!" And like you can set alarms just by talking to it. You don't even have to lift a finger. But I think that what her illustrates is that inevitably that simplicity is going to give way to complexity.
Yeah.
And that's going to, relating it back to isolation, is that going to make you feel more alone or less alone?
Yeah.
I don't know, interesting.
I mean, it could be a future where you have like a sort of little slot by your charging station to put your genitals in.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I'm...
To what purpose?
Yeah, well, we'll find out, I'm sure.
I mean, someone better be building that.
Yeah, if not, I'm going to start.
To sack in this podcast, start building wall sockets so that you could have sex with.
Yeah, look out for that.
Whilst asking Google
to
play you forest sounds.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, I think it is the definitive, certainly the more modern example of that.
Yeah.
Because again, like we said before, it ties into the ideas of isolation, but through the lens of the technology that we're all too familiar with. Obviously, it's much more sophisticated than it is at the moment.
Yeah.
But it's totally feasible.
Yeah. It doesn't. It's not out of our reach.
And I think that's part of the reason why it works so well as not just a comment on isolationism and how technology can fuse with that, but also technology in itself.
Yeah.
And how that's going to impact us moving forward. Hopefully it doesn't end like Terminator. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to move on then to isolation by species.
Yeah, okay. You want to talk about a film you have a lot of reverence for.
Oh, yeah. It's Under the Skin.
No.
A film that I know we both love. I really want to talk about more the journey that Scarlett Johansson's unnamed alien character takes through the film.
Yeah. Because
she's initially on the planet to harvest male human organs for meat.
Yeah.
Although it's not really sort of disclosed in the narrative of the film, but in the book, there's like a background sort of study or exploration of why this is being done.
Okay.
So like human meat is sort of like a delicacy.
Okay.
And it's her job to bring human men in via seduction, and then obviously have a way with them, not sexually, but turning them into this
despite
sort of
what they might believe.
Yes, this sort of pulverized sort of paste that can be, I guess, taken off to wherever it needs to go. Yeah. But what happens throughout the process of the film is through these sort of like planned and choreographed exchanges in which she sort of reels them in with her sexuality.
Yeah.
She takes sort of snapshots of their humanity. As this happens more and more, she begins to sort of become fascinated by what it is to be human. And that's where the film sort of moves away from the sort of unnerving sci-fi horror element and more a study of the human condition from the eyes of an alien.
Yeah,
in the sense that they're always looking in. They can never quite attain or understand quite what it is about the human condition that's so appealing, because she sees the good and the bad.
Yeah.
And it's what makes the study all the more fascinating is the director, Jonathan Glazer's preference for keeping the alien in these sort of ground level environments. There's no sort of sweeping sci-fi vistas or like these sprawling urban metropolises. That word again.
Yeah.
Metropoli. It's in like shopping centres and these sort of
like
dirty
A-roads
streets.
and stuff.
Yeah. And like lingering around like I think it's Hibernian Football Club the Hibernian Football Club ground, you know. All these places, of course we're not Scottish, but they're close enough to sort of give this film a sort of a bizarre domestic feel that not only complements the sort of horror elements of the film, but also, again, like I said before, that journey to humanity.
Okay, yeah. I am agreeing with you again, but I do love that film. I love what I really loved about it is how, I mean, like as you said before, there's actually a lot of context to that story that any kind of, you know, if you were adapting it, you might think I've got to include all this stuff about her harvesting these bodies and how it's a delicacy to her sort of race. But what I love and what I think really contributes to that sort of sense of isolation is the fact that it's sort of adapted from the feel of the book. It's kind of like what Alex Garland did with Annihilation. He read it once, put it down, and then just wrote the script. He didn't ever revisit it again. So a lot of the DNA of the story is in there, but it's basically adapted from memory. And I think that it just really helps with you sort of delving into her mind. I say her mind, you don't only because she's sort of
take on the human form.
And just how lonely and sort of a fascination from afar.
Yeah,
she's so clearly so detached, and that's partly down to Scarlett Johansson's performance, and just the way she interacts with people is so human, yet there's just something off about it, isn't there?
Yeah, it's incredibly sort of predatory. She starts the film as a predator, and then slowly just turns into like this chameleon.
Yeah,
and I think that transition in her character is one of the most compelling things about the film, I think.
Yeah, there's that bit near the end where does she break into a house? Or she enters, or she's staying at someone's house, isn't she?
Yeah, she's staying with a bloke, and I think they try and have sex.
Yes,
and obviously
that's right. Yeah,
they can't because her outer sort of exterior is obviously artificial.
Yeah.
But yeah, she stays in the house for a little bit, doesn't she, before she sequests herself into the Scottish Highlands.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's that moment where she's this might sound a little bit gratuitous, but when she's looking in the mirror. And she's just totally naked and just like looking at herself.
Yeah.
She's, for the first time, she sort of, you can tell she just yearns for the innards.
Yeah.
as well as what the exterior has kind of afforded her.
Because she's equipped for the job that she has. Within the context of the story, she is they've designed a beautiful human woman.
Yeah.
That can basically goad lonely men to their demise. In a way that suits this sort of clandestine alien butcher shop thing going on. And I think that's really fascinating about the film. And I think sort of drifting slightly away from isolation, or the theme of isolation slightly, but I think it also speaks to Johansson herself, the role that she plays, and the fact that the way sort of Glazer did it, that she would drive around Edinburgh in that big white van.
Yes, yeah.
With cameras all around, and some of the interactions, it just seems so strange to me that a stratospheric star like Scarlett Johansson, who is, a brilliantly talented actress, but many people as a sex symbol.
Yeah.
And yet she's in this sort of downplayed role. Glazer sort of downplays her sexuality in one sense, in that she's almost not noticeable in terms of this sort of celebrity obsession, but maintains it to suit the themes of the film.
Yeah.
Which is this idea that she is there to, well, like we said before, feast, well, not herself, but supply the human meat goods, to her overlords or whatever. So I just think it's a really interesting sort of meta. Oh God, I hate the use of that word, but it's an interesting meta study on her fame and her presence as an actress, alongside being, I think, a brilliant exploration of isolation.
Yeah, in
the sense that she is isolated. She can never have that human experience, no matter how hard she tries, and it ends pretty badly for her. Spoilers.
Yeah.
And pretty tragically, but in a way I think is fitting for the film.
It's kind of quite beautiful.
Yeah, because she's never going to get that humanity. She's never going to get the acceptance.
I mean, I'm just remembering another scene from that horrible scene at the beginning with the person who drowns on the beach.
Oh, yeah.
She's watching them.
Yeah.
That is how Glazer sort of tells you, hey, this person she's not human at all. She's got no empathy at that point. She just leaves this boy on the beach. And the parents drowned. Jesus Christ, that child is really crying, and she just turns and walks away. Like, bloody hell, what a bombshell, and what a way to introduce you to that kind of detachment of the characters. Great.
And a detachment that slowly erodes away as the film progresses.
Yeah,
brilliant film. If you haven't seen it, and you can go with the fact we've just ruined it for you, I wholeheartedly suggest that you watch it. The next theme is isolation through being out of time or out of touch.
Okay.
I guess the film that we both want to talk about in this context was Drive, a film about a loner, the archetypal loner, the lone wanderer. There's a lot of sort of discourse about the film being this exploration of the lone wanderer from the Wild West, taken from like the sort of arid, sun-scarred landscapes of the Old West and dropped in this neon-drenched, sprawling urban metropoli. Third time.
Oh, yeah. Boom.
I guess the thing that really struck me about the film in terms of its relationship with isolation is within those stories that the film, or Ryan Gosling's character, is kind of borrowing from, there's an idea that heroism legitimizes violence.
Okay, yeah.
Because if you think about a lot of classic westerns, the guys will turn up, the lead will sort of gun down people, sometimes villains, other times it's indigenous people, and it's all in the guise of heroism, and this guy has the morality that legitimizes his violence, or his use of violence. And in this case, you've already got someone who is a loner, who's clearly disconnected from the world around them, has very limited relationships.
Yeah, almost no social interactions at all. Yeah.
But then falls in love.
Yeah.
And through that, he begins to sort of access this part of himself that he has left behind.
Yeah.
And classic sort of... And it sort of still ties into that sort of cowboy thing that it's often a love interest that seems to draw out this residual humanity.
Yeah, yeah.
And sort of bring them into the light from the darkness of all the sort of killing that they've done.
Yeah, yeah.
And in this case, it almost becomes unbearably optimistic with use of the soundtrack and the lighting.
Yeah, yeah.
And, of course, coming to head with that lift sequence.
Oh, my God. Yeah, that's just horrendous. And an illustration of... You know, I mean, you got the class, the tale of the scorpion and the frog, isn't it? Which is on his back, and obviously in the story, the scorpion stings the frog, and its excuses, it's in my nature. I'm sorry, I can't help it. And that's basically that kind of morality tale, and a very similar thing happens right there in that lift. It was he can't move away from that isolation that he's experienced for so long, and he acts accordingly, despite the fact that he's got his new kind of love interest there with him. And it's illustrated. It's not a heroic moment at all. What he does, it's just gruesome and really difficult.
Yeah, I think it sort of speaks to the idea we sort of touched on earlier about heroism legitimizing violence, in the sense that they're in the lift together, they kiss, and it's a beautifully shot, beautifully lit scene. And the soundtrack's inch perfect in that moment.
Yeah.
It's almost sort of ethereal.
Yeah.
And then the other gentleman who's in the lift is a sort of foot soldier of this criminal enterprise or organisation, and he goes to draw his gun, and then Gosling's driver drivey disarms him and throws him down to the ground. And that would have been an act of heroism, to leave it there. You've saved the love of your life.
Yeah.
You've dispatched the assailant in a way that is, more than acceptable given the parameters.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I would know. I'm fucking hell, I don't know what, as if I'm talking, I've any idea about, the ethics of self-defense or self-defense at all. But, in the context of the narrative, it sort of would have been odd just to leave it there. I mean, I don't really crave for that level of violence, but then the moment happens. He repeatedly stamps on this guy's head.
Yeah.
Beyond the realms of, this isn't just saving someone's life.
No, this is his own emotions kind of getting the better of it.
Enacting this violence. And then she steps out of the elevator and looks in at horror at him. Yeah. And he knows at that exact moment he can never be the person that she wants him to be. Yeah. And he can never be the hero that the audience wants him to be.
Yeah.
Because the sort of journey that the hero undertakes in many of these films, the violence that they sort of submerge themselves in, I guess maybe is sort of reined in by the ethics of the time. Whereas in Drive, it's full frontal.
Yeah, like he needs to leave right now. Because otherwise he'll get arrested. And that'll be that. It's a really ironic use of that college song, the real human being.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's neither of those things by the end of that film.
No.
He's not a real hero at all, and he's not really that much of a human being either. It's just a really interesting choice of soundtrack.
Yeah, he's sort of surrendered himself to violence.
Yeah.
I think he's always sort of surrendered himself to violence.
Yeah.
But this sort of stretch out for humanity gives, I guess, her and the audience hope that maybe he won't sort of degenerate back into that former self and that past self.
Yeah.
And that lift sequence shows that it's always going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, great casting, because Ryan Gosling is such a charismatic guy, isn't he? And so that expectation is only going to be exemplified by that.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, kind of parallel with Under the Skin almost, with the beach scene in Under the Skin, there's a scene at the beginning of Drive where he's in a cafe and someone just asks him a question. I can't remember what he says, but he just turns round and just like spits insults at this guy with a really deadpan kind of blank expression on his face, and that's again that cue that tells you like this guy's a real loner.
And he's not a hero.
No, not at all.
He's not a hero.
He's a scorpion.
Yeah, exactly. Dirty scorpion. There was another film I quickly wanted to mention. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but Lonely Are the Brave.
I've not seen that. No.
So it just quickly, but it's Kirk Douglas plays like a cowboy clinging on to the last sort of vestiges of the cowboy ideology. It's sort of like rootin' tooting, hard drinking, hard fighting, sort of
gunslinger,
this hyper masculine image that, you know, for a very long time was one of the great symbols of American cinema.
Yeah.
And then you have this guy who's in a period of time where the Wild West is no longer this untamed landscape. There are fences everywhere.
Yeah.
And he goes into bars and people react differently to him.
Yeah, okay.
And the film sort of progresses more and more into this, basically him being hunted down by the police. This sort of, it's vaguely similar to Rambo in this sense of someone. Obviously, the reasons for this isolation are different.
Yeah.
That's another great example of a film, actually. But one for trauma, perhaps.
Definitely.
That wasn't planned.
No.
I promise.
No.
It actually wasn't.
Spontaneous Rambo.
But it's this sort of idea that you're out of touch, out of date, and out of time.
Yeah. And
everyone around you, their behaviour towards you, the society that you used to inhabit is just not built for you anymore. And it's a really... I mean, Kirk Douglas is immense in the film. I mean, I'm a big Kirk Douglas fan, but it's one of my favourite performances and probably my top 3 westerns of all time. It's just... It's that good. I would really... You know, it's really hard to find. I actually found it on Mubi one night. One of the guys I used to work with, a French fella called Alexi, said to me, you know, you need to watch this, check out this film before it goes. And I just did it on a complete whim on my laptop.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it ended up having such an impact on me that I just, whenever I think about the best Western films, it's there.
Oh, okay.
Because I think the best Western films, not all, but typically tend to come from that period of reflection.
Yeah.
It's interesting we talk about Drive being this sort of, you know, reflecting on the sort of the heroism and the sort of inherent flaws within that heroism.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the best Westerns tend to be the films that focus on the, you know, the fact that actually this isn't a place that should be used to sort of showcase morality or decency.
Yeah.
These places are actually horrible,
yeah.
and the people that lived in these landscapes are horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Lonely the Brave, Kirk Douglas's character isn't necessarily evil. He's more just, like I said, out of time, out of place.
Okay.
But it's, yeah, I think the Western's a great place to look for if you want to see that sort of reflection on heroism and how flawed it really is, and how really by obsessing over that, it's probably not the most healthy thing for our society that we think about these things.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of straying into territory I have very little idea about, but
just I'd love to watch that actually. Just the idea of, you know, being an analog guy in a digital world.
Yeah,
is that kind of idea of and how that can be very isolating, I imagine. You know, if you kind of subscribe to those sort of hyper-masculine ideas, the isolation can only grow worse. Like, you're not encouraged to sort of seek help or find solace in other human beings if you're this kind of gruff, like, lone, you know, the sort of Lone Ranger type person. Lone Ranger, is that right? Or I mean,
I want to say it totally applies to the film. So, I'll
lone gunslinger. Go with it. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, just thought it was worth a mention because I don't know. It's funny. There's a list of films I sort of looked to shoehorn into the podcast. Last week it was Predator 2.
Oh yeah.
Today it's Lonely the Brave. Two very different films, but fuck it, I'm doing it.
Do it.
So again, I sort of feel like we're going through these really quick, but again, brevity. You know, we don't want to be here for like 3 hours.
No problem.
Or unless that's what they want.
I mean, we could never stop recording.
We could never stop. Yeah. The next one is cultural, socio-political isolation.
Okay.
So I guess this one being less about ideology that is personal and more about these power structures that isolate you. What have you got?
What have I got? I don't know if this is not a power structure, but I, Daniel Blake.
I would argue definitely about power structure, I, Daniel Blake.
Maybe you're right. Actually, I was just thinking in terms of because another large theme in that film is the fact that
he's no.
You know, just because he's an older man, that doesn't help him either. But it is very much about, you know, his class.
Yeah, government imposed.
Yeah, and how that combined with being an elderly gentleman and not being able to move forward with the time, similar to what you were saying earlier about.
Lonely the Brave.
Yeah. I just think it's a really heartbreaking illustration of how society, as it moves forward, and how the the powers of the country get sort of changed and become less about the collective and more about the individual, and what that can do to people who are 60 or over. Really, it's really heartbreaking, really horrendous. No, it's not a horrendous portrayal at all. He's a really kind character, but just what happens to him is really, really upsetting.
Yeah, I think to me it's like that sort of systemic apathy.
Okay.
The individuals who do fall on hard times for whatever reason have to deal with and face.
Yeah.
And how, I guess it could be isolation through deep dehumanization. You're having your humanity taken away from you by not being given your sort of fundamental basic rights.
Yeah.
And I've been on the dole a few times, and I've always sort of felt that, particularly in my sort of later experiences with it, that it isn't really about helping you out. Really,
it's about ticking boxes.
It's about ticking boxes, and it's almost the sales culture has bled into this, into the sort of the world of finding people work, which I think it only further deepens the issues, because when you create this sort of structure that wants quick answers, there's not a one size fits all sort of approach.
It's also, it sort of weirdly relates a little bit back to what we were saying about her, about how technology is meant to simplify things.
Yeah.
And whilst that can be the case for some generations, it's a lot more complicated in that older generations who are used to basically writing things on paper,
they're
going to get left behind because they have to go. They're not going to invest in a computer at 78 or whatever. They have to go to the library and do it. And, And you get an hour and the time runs out. And I'm thinking specifically about a scene where he tries to make a CV. And apply for a job so he can basically pay his phone bill and things like that. And it's just he's so lonely in that moment, despite the fact he's surrounded by people, because those people are all successfully using this technology and he's not, and it's
it speaks a lot about the idea about technology. It's supposed to be simplistic or make one's life a bit simpler, but when used in a bureaucratic institution, it's not simple. In fact, it almost ends up aiding the needlessly complicated nature of those institutions. It's strange because when I first saw that film, I was really blown away by it, and I'd seen it since, and it didn't impact me as much.
Oh, really?
I think the key messages and ideas of the film I totally buy into, because this isn't something that is fantasy. This is reality.
Continues.
How clever am I? There's something about the film that doesn't feel quite as real to me.
Okay.
Not necessarily in the themes, but in the way he approaches them. I don't know.
No.
I wasn't sure. I'm not sure about why it was that it sort of didn't sit as well with me the second time. But
I think it might even be down to the way it was shot, because you're used to Ken Loach gritty realism, used to it looking gritty physically, and I'm almost certain this was a digitally shot film, and so that kind of that natural sheen you get with the digital camera could have actually weirdly taking you out of it maybe the second time. I don't know.
I think the thing about using digital cinematography sometimes is that it can make things look a bit soapy.
And
I remember, funnily, one of my dear friends saying to me that to him it was nothing more than a glorified episode of EastEnders.
Oh, wow.
Which I think was a harsh criticism. Valid, but harsh for me. But I could see at least sort of it certainly visually where he was coming from, and that might be a part of the reason why. I don't know.
Maybe,
But I think you're right about the sort of the idea of it tying in with lots of other ideas of isolation about age, technology, and of course the systemic forces that can almost cultivate isolation. Another sort of, I guess, film that I can think of that ties well into what we've just talked about is Bicycle Thieves.
Okay.
A film about a period of time in Italy, post-war Italy, countries in financial ruins. People are desperately clamouring for any source of income they can find. And it's about this man who was lucky enough to acquire a job putting up posters around the city. In order to do that, he needs a bike. So his family sells some treasured possessions. He gets a bike. On his first day of the job, his bike gets stolen. And the rest of the film is about him and his son desperately sort of going through the city, trying to find their bike in order to,
make ends meet. I
Make
guess.
ends meet, yeah. And it's a simple. I mean, it's the film is arguably one of the most defining examples of Italian neorealism.
Yeah.
A genre that seeks to sort of show post-war Italy for what it was.
Yeah.
And the strife and the difficulties and the socio-political apparatus that made it difficult for them to navigate anything more than this situation. You need something as simple as a bike to make money. Without the bike, there is nothing.
Yeah. It's just that does just kind of hammer at home just how horrible it must have been post-war of a country trying to get back up on its feet. And something as simple as not even a motorized vehicle can just scupper your plans for not even fortune, but just scraps of cash. Is really striking and a really interesting way to illustrate isolation.
Yeah,
via the way that a government has handled a particular situation.
Yeah, and it's also about the sort of the system that they live in the sense that the only way that these individuals can that can gain money is by almost clambering atop of each other. They have to steal from each other.
Yeah.
They have to rely on the fact that people are going to sell their treasured possessions. One of the most striking scenes for me upon a recent rewatch was the scene where the main character takes in some really nice bed sheets to sell for the bike, and the woman takes them into this huge warehouse with shelves upon shelves of bed sheets that people have sold. So it just goes to show that in times of great struggle, there are still people profiting off this.
Oh man, yeah.
And I think it's, a really striking moment for me in terms of this idea that the system the characters live in is very much driven by that singular-minded desire to succeed.
Yeah.
And how that can either inadvertently or not end up sort of treading on the toes of others or actively making other people's lives worse to make yours better.
Yeah, I mean, if you live in that climate, it's going to be isolating because you can't trust anyone all of a sudden.
Yeah, that's it.
I haven't thought about that film in a long time. That's a really wicked illustration of...
Oh, thank you.
Well, no, it's all right. Yeah.
So, we're going to finish on one that ties in nicely with The Whale.
Yes.
Isolation through trauma.
Perfect.
Isolation through living with one's demons. And now this is a very common theme in lots of films.
Yeah.
But particularly a couple of films that we're going to discuss right now. So here we are then, Ben. The big one is, of course...
Taxi Driver.
Of course, yeah. I mean, there's so much to said about this film, about these themes, isn't there, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's just... As a very overt illustration of isolation, it's the cream of the crop, really. A lot of Paul Schrader's films are about very isolated characters, but I know this is Scorsese, but Paul Schrader wrote it. Again, it's another film set in a city. You wouldn't think a lot of films that are about loneliness would be set in this kind of sprawling urban area, but here we are, a man surrounded by people, and he's unable to connect with any of them. It is largely about his attempts to, and his failures to, really, and how that leads him on a kind of downwards spiral into chaotic madness, really. Just a really fascinating, undoubtedly, it's an absolute classic. If you haven't seen Taxi Driver,
what are you doing?
What are you doing, mate? Stop listening to this for a start. It doesn't stop with Travis Bickle either. He has an interaction with another fellow kind of very... It's Scorsese who plays the other chap. And he's kind of experiencing something slightly similar to the main character, which is wonderful.
It's it's a one of the greats for not only this genre, but for me, it's probably my favourite Scorsese movie.
Yeah.
And that's not an uncommon opinion. I think that's held by a lot of people.
Yeah, no.
I just love it. What I love so much about it is the film. It's often seen as the sort of tentpole moment for New Hollywood, isn't it? The cinema that is almost looking inwards with greater freedom. The classic studio system. I mean, it'd be silly to say that films couldn't do that before. They could, and there's plenty of brilliant examples that could, but they had to be a lot more guarded and a lot more secretive about how they did it.
Yeah.
Whereas in New Hollywood, they were reflecting on society with the much greater freedom, because that's what people wanted. They were clamoring for a Hollywood that could explore the darkest corners of a country that had been previously obscured by this rigid cultural conservatism, that had prevented that from ever happening before. So that's one of the first reasons I love that film. It's the birth of a new generation of filmmakers, and I think why it's so emblematic of that explosion is, the fact is it's all in Travis Bickle himself. He's a former US soldier returning from Vietnam. Of course, historically, a lot of people came back to Vietnam jaded, riddled with all manner of neurological
post-traumatic stress disorder
issues.
And that kind of
thing. And not only have they come back to a country that is, it doesn't welcome them with open arms by any stretch of the imagination. Also, they're just thrust back into society as they are.
And forced to kind of hold down menial jobs.
And De Niro just plays that so brilliantly. I mean, this character is a broken man who is riddled with contradictions, riddled with so many sort of difficulties. The way he struggles to even navigate the world around him.
I think
everything. I don't know. It's just played with inch perfect execution by De Niro. I mean, I think it's probably still his best performance for me.
Definitely one of the best. I often think of Taxi Drivers. At the end of war films where they always have that little section at the end of like what happens next, what happens to them afterwards, like they do at the end of Jarhead. It's that, but as a whole film. It doesn't. There's nothing. There's no flashbacks to him as a soldier or anything like that. It's just and. What a fantastic way to express a great deal of honesty about what happens to a lot of veterans of was it the Vietnam
War,
but any war really. Wonderful. Love
it. I mean, I think it just speaks to this sort of the darker aspects of culture and society. I mean, the way his car sort of leers through these streets is like it's like just a vessel for him, isn't it? To sort of. And it almost becomes this sort of claustrophobic with these sort of troubling ideologies that he espouses, either audibly or internally through the inch-perfect use of narration by Schrader in the screenplay. The screenplay is an absolute must-read, by the way, if you're that way inclined. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I've sort of oversimplified the key ideas of the film, really. I mean, there are loads of brilliant YouTube analysis to watch or books to read on it, because it's just,
You're presented with a behemoth when you get asked to talk about Taxi Driver. Like that's,
you
don't want to get it wrong, do you?
Yeah. There's a lot of pressure in it, isn't there?
Yeah. It's why I was searching my mind. I was like, shit, was he a soldier? I better not mention it just in case. Of course he fucking was. Do you mind if I have a quick segue into two films?
Segue away.
Well, there's two films I want to talk about. I'm a big fan of like survival films.
Okay, good.
And a lot of these are like very overtly about isolation. It's often about someone kind of just being alone, not through choice, but through happenstance. So you've got 127 Hours.
Okay.
Which is a lot similar to The Whale than I think people might believe, just in the sense that someone has let themselves go, really.
Right.
In the case of 127 Hours, it's because he likes to be alone, and he likes to kind of explore the wilderness by himself and listen to his music, and that's just sort of what he loves doing. But through that, and through that lack of interaction with others in any meaningful way, he ends up getting trapped by a boulder and realising, like, I've not told anyone where I'm going. And
the worst time to realise.
And it's just, it's a very. I think there's a lot more similarities just to The Whale, which I'll touch on a little bit later on, than people might realise, because he's forced to reflect on how he's treated others and how he's behaved in his past. And in terms of our theme, isolation, it's just it's just all there. It's just one guy for 90 minutes, basically. And it's an action film about a guy who can't move, right? You've got to mention something like that. And also the other one, briefly,
go on.
I just want to talk about Into the Wild.
Oh yeah.
So that is by the isolation is by choice, but the realization is the same. Yeah. In that he, through his what he thinks is the ideal lifestyle, he's actually he's kind of stupid. Like he didn't say to anyone. He didn't construct any meaningful relationships, so nobody knew where he was. Nobody knew exactly where he was going.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, he needs help.
Does he eat mushrooms or something?
He eats berries, yeah.
Oh, that's
it. It's just such a simple thing that happens here. And all of a sudden...
What a way to die.
Yeah, he just needs...
Eating berries.
Yeah, I know. Like, and this is after you've followed this guy for 2 hours and you're kind of with him. You're like, yeah, go, I love this kind of nomad sort of living off the land, just like writing poetry, and then all of a sudden you're like, mate, no, you need people. That was that's what I got from it. It's like you need other people.
It taps into that fantasy, doesn't it? Because I think in this increasingly modern world, people really want to hark back to a more sort of traditional or naturalist lifestyle. People are desperate for it. People are clamouring to go into the woods and dance with the squirrels instead of spending 3 hours on their iPhones looking at like someone braising a steak, something like that. You know what I mean? Like people, I think, are starting to realise just how much of their lives they've surrendered to this technology, and in a way, it's made people go too much the other way.
Yeah,
and I think there's a danger there. Which I know, obviously, the film was released in a time before smartphones that really took off, or if at all existed.
The theme is there, though.
Yeah, this idea of just like being I guess romanticising something like that to the point of it being dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic. I think about it sometimes. I'm like, man, I'd love to maybe just go camping for a week.
Yeah.
And just like you disconnect.
Yeah.
But then the first night you're like, I'm fucking freezing.
Yeah.
And it's that, it is that as a film, I think, Into the Wild. It's just...
I feel like camping is so dependent on people going, this is good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Saying it to you all the time. This is good, isn't it?
Yeah.
You sort of go, yeah.
Yeah, we wasted a whole fucking bag of firelighters.
Yeah.
And, really cold and hungry and it's raining and we ran out of beers, but yeah.
There's some weird creature rustling outside my tent.
Yeah.
Like, oh, fuck that. Obviously 2 keen campers here. I'm sure if you're someone that's a bit more... prepared for the greater outdoors, I'm sure you'll be thinking fuck off, but
yeah.
I don't know. I think there is something about that, about the about this sort of, because I think we really are, people are getting too into that fantasy now, particularly those that with children as well. I think people like are terrified of this idea of their kids becoming some sort of like biomechanical sort of nightmare that just doesn't do anything. But
I don't think the woods are the answer to that, though.
Not necessarily. I mean, connecting to nature is a good thing. We have to say that. And
I've been a bit harsh about...
Yeah, we're being a bit harsh about that sort of hippy-dippy type who wants to... But I think, there's a balance. And I think that's what the film is essentially suggesting, that it's good to get out there. But,
It's about his connection with others as well and how he's pushed people away and the realisation that he's just made a huge mistake. And there's a bit where it's very overt. He literally carves into a bit of wood. Happiness is sharing. Okay,
so before we go into the whale, that sounds weird.
Yeah. Before we enter the whale,
sounds like something you'd say shortly before being removed from the Sea Life Centre. I want to talk about a film that explores the idea of isolation and is a mainstream film that has achieved mass mainstream popularity. And for that reason and many other reasons is problematic in the manner that it does it.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's a lot of things in The Whale that I think there's a degree of earnestness in what they want to explore in the film.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's because of the trappings of mainstream cinema, audience expectation, or just this is how they wanted to portray it. But there are problems. It creates problems.
Yeah.
And I think the film that I wanted to quickly mention beforehand, The Joker,
is
a film that has many fucking problems. I feel in pretty much every single department.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that if you enjoyed the film, you're a moron, because obviously that's a very pretentious opinion to have. But to sort of contradict that, I'm going to rag on it for a bit. In the sense that I think the main reason the film was lauded as this sort of incredibly impactful assessment of the modern world is because audiences are hankering for an experience like that, but don't necessarily want an experience that's going to commit all the way.
Yeah.
They want a film that's still going to be very much indebted to the models and forms of storytelling that have existed within superhero filmmaking for the last decade or longer. And then a film comes along with a darker colour palette, a villain with a deep and rich history that even people that aren't into comic books would know.
Yeah.
And then there's violence and blood and swearing. And I don't want to sound pompous, but I think it's those reasons why so many people think this film is better than it is.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah, I remember seeing it and my initial thoughts were just like, I don't know what the fuss was all about.
No.
Like, it was good. I didn't think it was bad initially. I think it weathered in my mind over time afterwards. It's got problems with the script, especially in how it handles his relationship with another woman who lives in his block of flats.
Oh, Jesus.
That was just so lazy. I was just that was the point where I just thought, like, why are people not talking about this moment and how hackneyed it is, and how just like how many times has that been used before, that trope of
she was
not
never
really
there. Yeah. That's emblematic to me of that sort of that fear of alienating mainstream audiences. You know what I mean?
Completely. Like, I thought that she should have been real. That would have been so much more interesting.
And it's more of an issue to me in a damning indictment of the film because it wants you to believe that it isn't that.
Yeah.
If the film was like happy to admit that this was like mainstream entertainment, I wouldn't have a fucking issue with it.
Yeah,
all of my issues with the film, I'd probably still have them, but they wouldn't be anywhere near as sort of intense had the film or the director, what was Todd Phillips. Yeah. Basically banging on about how this is like the new taxi driver for the new generation, and trying to sort of like hark back to a period of Hollywood where it was this sort of like brave new frontier, this subversive filmmaking about a generation of people desperately wanting to look in on the society that had been told is great but clearly isn't.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you've just got this, which to me, I don't know, like that's why I think I found the film so difficult to like or enjoy. And I know you're not supposed to necessarily enjoy it. It's supposed to make you come out of the cinema and go, wow.
Yeah.
But to me, like the film didn't serve any other purpose than being like a rallying cry for people who ever go at women on the internet. You know what I mean? Like it's just like a, don't push us, but like, there's no nuance.
No.
And Todd Phillips thinks that because he can sort of like half-heartedly, sort of link the themes of and ideas of the problems that are going on in Gotham with our own society, that we're going to sort of establish this ideological bridge that's going to bring us closer to him, the character, Yeah. I don't know, like, I just don't think that any of these ideas that he's sort of saying or attempting to say, and he is so full of himself as well. The film is so full of itself in saying that. It's telling you all the time, like, oh, society is broken. Oh, this is what's going to happen if we don't fix it. What are you going to do if you don't fix it? And it's like, well, I'm not sure that the mass population would be motivated by mindless violence to, like, take the upper elite to task.
Yeah,
because a guy wore some makeup and danced down some stairs like a bell end. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just not convinced.
No.
And again, it wouldn't bother me if
Yeah.
everyone in the film didn't spend so fucking long telling me that it was really important and really special.
Yeah.
And this is like the landmark moment in the medium. You know, maybe I'm sort of overplaying that to sort of justify my frustration with the film. But what do you think, Ben? Sorry.
No, I mean, again, I just what I was saying before. I thought it was derivative to the point of being like abrasive. And it was confusing to me that no one was talking about it in that context. Everyone was talking about it. If they were talking about it in a negative way, they were talking about its potential for it to incite violence. That was just not the problem with the film at all, because it, to its credit, it doesn't portray its central character as someone who you should follow. But
I don't know. I think a lot of people would.
Do you think?
Yeah,
that's interesting. I don't know.
But then I'm not discrediting your point. I know what you're saying in the sense that it's so cheaply done that no one surely could. But I think a lot of people came out of this film thinking that this was like a plausible outcome. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I maybe you're right. Actually, I just think
not to undermine my point earlier.
No, it was just confusing to me why the comparisons between it, Taxi Driver, and The King of Comedy were so positive.
Yeah,
I was like, it's just that's that's all it is, though.
Yeah.
Like there's no, and you've slapped Gotham onto it, and
Yeah.
you've taken a beloved franchise and warped it to kind of fit basically to advertise it to people who have seen Taxi Driver once and think they're a massive Scorsese fan.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just I have a lot of problems with Joker as well. It looks nice.
Yeah.
But
it's forced.
yeah, big time, really overt. And actually, moving on a little bit to The Whale, I think that was, in terms of things being slightly forced on its audience, I think that it suffered from that as well.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It might seem that the whole reason for this episode was to have a thinly veiled dig at Joker.
I think it needs to be said. Because,
but yeah, I think it ties in with the film themes of The Whale well, which we're going to talk about now.
Lovely stuff.
Because we've had our whistle-stop tour through isolation and cinema. You're welcome. But we're going to start discussing Aronofsky's latest effort. To sort of reiterate what I said earlier, I feel like my stock with this film, the stock of the film, has dropped substantially since I have left the cinema.
Okay.
In a similar way, I mean, I sort of instantly I didn't like the Joker the moment I came out of the cinema, but the same sort of reasons, in the sense that not necessarily it's trying to it's relating to another film, but more in the sense that the way it executes a lot of its key themes, because the film is about the many manifestations of trauma.
Yeah.
You've got Brendan Fraser's character who eats. He's got trauma from various things that have happened in his life. Yeah, through his closet homosexuality, to leaving a family and a daughter as a result of that homosexuality, to the partner that he was most in love with, the person, to losing the person he was closest to more than anyone else in the world. So, as a result, he develops an eating disorder.
Yeah.
Then you've got the daughter, who is obviously scarred by the split up of her family, and obviously the emotional difficulties that she has with her mother, and the absence of her father, and this has created someone that,
she's quite detached in her own right.
Yeah, she is, and I think it's that sort of hallmark of trauma that you desperately want to protect your own world by pushing everyone else away around you.
Yeah.
So you make yourself the most unpalatable person you can be, in a way to defend yourself.
Yeah.
And then you've got the character, the nurse, who's his friend is Brendan Fraser's friend, who is also the sister of Brendan Fraser's former partner.
That's right, yeah.
And who is obviously scarred by the loss of him, and directs a lot of that vitriol towards religion, organised religion.
Yes.
Because in her mind, that is a lot of the reason why that her brother couldn't break away from that and enjoy his relationship.
Yeah.
Given the fact that obviously he's gay, and in a lot of Christian society that is frowned upon.
Yeah, especially in America.
Yes. So there's lots of different, and there's a few other areas as well, but that's essentially the meat and potatoes of it, really.
Pretty much.
It's probably not a very sensitive thing to say, given what the film's about, but but that's the sort of nucleus of it, the sort of the shared experience of trauma and how these different versions interact with one another.
Yeah, and the inciter of all that trauma is the central character of the film.
Yeah,
you could argue, it all began when he left his family.
Yeah,
and it's kind of ironic that act, whilst it was done with the best of intentions for himself, has ultimately, in the long term, done nothing good for him at all. And you really can see why he's sort of inhabiting that mental space, that self-destructive mental space. Like I said earlier, I'm a bit more positive on it, I feel, on the whole. I can forgive Aronofsky for not being subtle, because he never has been.
This is a fart in a lift.
Yeah.
A shit in a lift. Someone just walked in a lift, pulled their pants and trousers down, just shit in front of you. Levels of subtlety.
Yeah, but I like that. I just think that...
Avoid lifts with Ben.
Yeah. Christ.
Not car lifts.
Avoid lifts with me, and also the driver in the film Drive.
Yes.
I'm more positive towards it. I think I have a a personal. I keep using the word reverence. You used it first in the first podcast, and I love it. But I have a personal reverence for films that can be overwhelmingly emotional.
Okay.
I think that if they have the ability to have, give me that little lump, I'm like, that's done a good job there. That's really. I've almost drawn to films like that.
Mm-hmm.
Tearjerkers, I guess.
Okay.
There's a threshold for me. Like there's
Right.
some which are just weepy fucking nonsense, but this was the right balance. I sort of found ultimately,
Interesting. Okay.
despite the fact that a lot of the dialogue didn't help that cause.
I think. I mean, I would argue that a lot of that sort of in the pursuit of making. If you want to make something that's going to make a lot of people cry, there has to be a pursuit of very sort of broad metaphor and allegory in order to do that.
Yeah.
And in the pursuit of doing that, you could lose some of the nuance and realism that you might aspire to do.
Yeah.
And I would argue that whilst it might be effective, and I think you're right in the sense that the film does achieve that sort of broad emotional impact.
Yeah.
But I think that's also to the film's detriment in the way it handles the sort of mechanics of getting to that point.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, the script, I mean, fucking hell. And then the thematic link between the poem, the whale itself, the book, the Moby Dick.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't.
And then the Christian subplot with Ty Simpkins. Yeah, I mean, that was...
The kid from Insidious.
Yeah, that was completely... Again, that's just Aronosfky going, I like exploring religion.
Yeah, but he did it
In
so
film.
well earlier. The Fountain, leave it at that, because that was so. That was the one thing about The Fountain that wasn't subtle. Was it was about its connection to Christianity.
Yeah.
Because it didn't slap it out. But this really did, and also, so it's got its ties to Jonah and the Whale, and also Herman Melville's Moby Dick. Yes.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. Yeah, the lack of subtlety there was great. It did great on me a little bit. I agree with you there for sure.
And there's just some lines of dialogue.
Are you
Brendan
seriously
Fraser.
trying to parrot me right now? Like,
Yeah.
don't do
People
that.
are amazing.
Yeah.
Fucking hell.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus Christ.
It was a bit much, and didn't need it.
I think a lot of the more positive elements of the film come solely from performances.
We got the phrase naissance.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about it on the bus home, weren't we?
Yeah.
That
The slight parallels.
yeah, and obviously there is, he is obviously put a lot of the difficulty that he's had in his recent years into that performance.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the earnestness comes from.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's really anything to do with the film and more to do with the wider narrative about him.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's just got such a lovable face.
Yeah, he does.
and he can convey that emotion so wonderfully. I mean, it was so difficult to even ignore the praise about him in the film, but the way he conducted himself afterwards and the way he spoke so frankly and honestly in his interviews, and there's that where he gets a standing ovation from lots of his peers and he stands up and he looks so sort of bowled over. It's like, this is someone that's obviously gone through a really, really difficult time.
Yeah.
Was still working, but never really getting the sort of the big moments that this film will probably afford him now. I mean, I think he's back, isn't he?
I think so. I hope so.
But yeah, I think a large part of the reason for my emotional connection to the film was to him. Yeah. Really.
No, I think I do think that you're right in saying that, because there's a bit in kind of circling back to his earlier career, he was a bit of an action star. So he's in The Mummy, he's in a lot of sort of Universal properties.
George of the Jungle.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that at the cinema.
Yeah. And he was a bit of a star, and he's rejected that now. I feel, he's with this film. He tried to earlier. He was in Crash and stuff.
Oh yeah.
But he's kind of rejecting that kind of Hollywood male persona by saying, no, I'm going to do something honest. And there's a line in the film where he literally kind of says, I want you to tell me something honest. And that was one of the better lines in the film, I thought.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, that won me over.
Okay, fair enough, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why, maybe it's just the way he said it, but I was just like, I think you've put that in because of what's happened to him in his earlier career, and how he's developed that, and how he's kind of ultimately rejected his action star kind of childish but lovable kind of Hollywood leading man, and for something more honest. Yeah,
I think there's definitely an aspiration for that, and I don't think anyone in the film is setting out to do. No one really sets out to make a film and do a bad job of it, really.
No.
And again, the subjective nature of things makes it difficult to uniformly say things are bad. But I just didn't really get on with the execution with lots of these things, and I found that my connection to Fraser. Again, not the not the TV show. Fraser's and Hong Chau's performances.
Yeah,
I actually think Hong Chau was the superior performance. In the film.
Yeah, I think I personally thought they were on par.
But, okay,
yeah.
I just think that she had a bit more to manage in the sort of more subtler stuff.
Okay.
I mean, the whole. Her relationship with Ty Simpkins is, good-natured but ultimately misguided, sort of one man on a moral religious crusade, door knocker type. I think that's when it sort of, no matter what she did, that was only going to do her character a disservice, I think. But it's not necessarily a reflection of her performance. But I think the film would have been better served if the religious stuff was kept more to the background.
Okay. Yeah.
In the sense that she's obviously wrestling with a lot of resentment towards her father and the church to which he represents.
Yeah.
And she is basically saying that the church killed her brother. Her father killed her brother.
Yeah.
Not directly, but through sort of religious dogma.
Yeah.
And the the imposition of all of these basically unreasonable expectations that deny you your basic human rights to love who you want to love, be the person you want to be.
Yeah.
And that's something that she plays out brilliantly in the film. Even when, again, I've been a bit harsh, aren't I? But even when the script doesn't really do that in any meaningful way, I think she elevates it, and I think she handles the subtleties of that really well. And then, as I said, Aronosfky sort of ruins it by introducing that character who comes in and is supposed to represent, I guess, the best and worst of religion, in the sense that he clearly is genuine to some extent, that he wants to help people, but there is an ulterior motive there as well for him. And there's also judgment. He's still, the reason he wants to help Brendan Fraser's character is because he believes him to be ill. He believes him to be, and not because of his eating condition, by the way, because of his homosexuality. He is to be cleansed of that before he ascends to heaven. So there's obviously still that misguided bullshittery to his character. I just think he was really exaggerated. I think he could have, like I said before, he shouldn't have been in the film in its entirety. Not a reflection of him as a performance.
No, it was fine. Yeah.
But I just think that the film, particularly in terms of Chow's performance, she could have shouldered that more than all of that. She showed in those moments that she could have done that, and I don't think he was necessary to the plot at all.
I feel like it maybe, if the film hadn't been based so religiously, if you will, on the play, because you can really tell it's based on a play, and they have clearly taken a really broad idea about religion evading progression. Basically, they've taken that idea and boiled it down into one character that comes in and out of the flat.
Yeah.
If he just got out of that little apartment, and maybe, I don't know, then maybe they just adapted it into a film that affords moving around space more so than theatre does. Well, they could have done that. I think. Would it not have been more interesting?
Possibly, but would it not have undermined the themes of isolation to the film?
Oh yeah, I didn't think about it. Yeah, it would have done actually. Having him be out and about may well. I mean, it would have been a drastically different film.
I think those sort of like claustrophobic, the claustrophobic nature of the way that the themes are entangled with Fraser's character. I don't think you could have necessarily achieved that had he been sort of strolling around outside.
Yeah, no, that's.
I'm not saying necessarily that it can't be done, because if anything, the examples we've discussed talk about, how isolation can be embedded into a character and a theme regardless of landscape.
Yeah.
Or obviously doing it in a way that suits the landscape, should I say?
Yeah.
Of whatever story it is they're trying to make. But I just think that whole thing for me just really didn't work. And every time he got to the point where every time he came back in, I was like, oh, fuck off.
Yeah, no.
You know what I mean? Not only because of your belief system, genuinely, fair play to you. If you want to believe in certain stuff, that's fine. But if you're lecturing other people, then that's when it obviously becomes a problem, right? I think that's what most people, of our belief system would say, right?
Yeah.
Is that, of course, it's fine. Just because he just became so fucking annoying and superfluous to the narrative, and it became just more. He became more of a sort of walking, talking symbol of Aronosfky's struggle to hold allegory and metaphor in a meaningful enough way to make the film more impactful, or certainly that moment more impactful.
Yeah, no, I do think you're right in that the whole its approach to the fact that it approaches religion at all was slightly detrimental. I say slightly detrimental. I think it didn't need to be in there at all.
I mean, it's set in a period in a part of America where religion has clearly got a real hold on people, both for good and for bad, one assumes. But I just think, like I said before, Chow could have handled that. She clearly had enough, and she has the fucking chops, clearly by the performance in the film, that she could have handled that background.
Yeah.
Because we sort of alluded to it with the Joker, but I just think there's this sort of tendency now in films that subtlety isn't enough.
Yeah.
And you've got to sort of, and then when you're not subtle, and when you really go in, particularly a film that's about as sensitive issues as this film is, that's when you set yourself open for people to go, this is exploitative. This isn't good. Yeah,
a number of people have said this.
What's your view on that? I mean, I know this is something that it's a tough question to ask.
Yeah, no, it's difficult.
But I mean, I just wonder what your view is on it.
I don't think it's exploitative. No. This film, I think that I can understand why people would kind of take that away, because of the sort of the sheer physical size of Fraser's character Charlie. It can't help but maybe give off the impression it's leering at him a little bit. But I don't really know how else it could have been done. And the fact that you spend all of your time with this guy and you kind of get to know him, I actually feel like if they cast a genuinely overweight actor, it would have been worse. It would have been like more exploitative, not less, which is what a lot of people have been saying.
Interesting. Okay, I've not really considered that.
Do I have the right to an opinion? Maybe not.
Well, I don't know. I just think that really the fact that wholesale unsubtlety and the way that he goes about it leaves it more open for that.
Okay.
And I think had the film been a little bit less concerned with that lack of subtlety, it might have tightened that up a bit and made it a little bit less susceptible to those criticisms.
Okay,
because I agree with you on the sense that the film, to some degree, has to have that.
Yeah.
My issue with it, and I think where I agree a little bit with that sort of exploitative element, is that almost the way it almost treats him like a fantasy creature at points.
Okay.
Do you know, like the way when he like stands up and he is like not only like huge but really tall? It's almost like I don't know. The light sort of shines on him a little bit from nowhere. I mean, I know Aronofsky does that a lot.
Yeah.
But that's when I thought, that's a bit strange.
Okay, I didn't actually consider
maybe
that.
Maybe I'm just sort of.
He was almost. I mean.
It was almost like that's where the film starts to become classic Aronofsky and that sort of distortion of realism, right? To suit these sort of grand. There's always a sense of these grander themes that he's going for, right? I don't know. That's where I thought it was strange, but I agree in the sense that obviously it has to have that. It has to have him as he was.
Yeah, and it does have to kind of show you him in all of his kind of grotesqueness, in order to kind of to illustrate just how close he is to death, for one thing, and also just how out of control his eating disorder has become. But looking back on it, he was really tall, wasn't he?
Yeah,
and that wouldn't happen. You don't.
I don't know.
Up. I don't. I don't
know. whilst I think it's important that the film it sort of explores that visually, and you see him as he is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there was something that it didn't sit always that right with me, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. Yeah, it's just an interesting question because I think it's quite a big part of a lot of the reception to the film.
Yeah, definitely,
and that's that's fair enough, really. I mean, regardless of how this is executed, people are going to have opinions about this. Not just Charlie's response to trauma, but also the other characters. I mean, there were some really visceral moments of dialogue from the daughter, weren't there? I was like, wow, I'm not sure if this is a bit much.
I really grew to hate her character, and I think you're meant to, obviously, but I found it really.
Did you hate her? Did you?
Sadie Sink's character, I struggled a lot.
Okay.
To identify, I mean, although I could appreciate that she's been through quite a lot in her sort of earlier life, and the breakup of her family. I personally thought that the way she treated her dad, just because he's trying to reconnect with her and he's being so sweet and it's so clear that he's got so little time left, her response to that was just so almost inhuman to me. And I know that might just be based on like my maybe lack of exposure to human beings that are like that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I really struggle to get on with her in any way, really.
But I think this is the issue with the film in being about one location and one person that inhabits that location. You're only going to see that perspective.
Yeah.
You're only going to see his perspective the way. It's hard, I guess, to flesh out the aspects of the other characters that come and go.
Yeah, okay.
And when that happens, and if they're as extreme in the sense of the daughter, then I think that's going to... I think for a lot of people that would be their natural response, because the film is almost encouraging you to side with Fraser.
Yeah,
for lots of reasons.
Yeah.
But chiefly because he is the main character of this story. He is, all of the themes sort of pass through him.
Yeah,
and all the ideas of the film. He's very much the sort of the central pillar of this narrative.
Yeah,
and that creates problems for the other characters, I think.
Yeah,
and that's that's a problem with just the nature of the way they've decided to tackle this story, in the sense that you're making it very difficult for other characters to feel fleshed out enough to add, not necessarily justify, but add a bit more sort of depth to their characters in a way that would make those moments more believable.
Yeah, okay, maybe actually the fact that I had that reaction to her character, I thought Sadie Sink herself was really, really good at portraying her. The empathy just was all with Charlie and not with her at all for me. And I think that speaks to the problematic nature of the way the film handles it. It might be an issue that might not be the intention at all, but I just thought she was overwhelmingly horrendous to him. Like, there was one point where she just shouts at him, and again, this speaks to the sort of unsubtlety of the script. She's just like, "I can't wait for you to fucking die."
Yeah,
I was just like, okay, that's just so unbelievably nasty what you've said.
But they're not uncommon for teenagers to say anyway.
Well, no, yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean,
I'm sure I probably remember saying that at some point to somebody.
Yeah.
I think there is. There's an earnestness here. I think there's a desire to tell a compelling and interesting story about how trauma influences behaviour. How trauma can, essentially, it can give you demons that will haunt you to your death, or bring about an early death in case of Charlie's situation. But I think, again, I keep going back to it, but I think it's that lack of subtlety. And Aronosfky focusing on areas I think are necessary to the more affecting parts of the narrative that impact the effective nature and the realistic nature of that.
Yeah,
you only have to look on. I mean, after I've seen a film, I like to give it a couple of days to sit on myself, and then I'll take to the reviews then.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And I go on Letterboxd, because I find Letterboxd this isn't a plug, but I find it's like a really good way to sort of get a wide scope of opinions from people that are really into writing deep analytical stuff to people who just got like a 2-sentence reaction. And I think a lot of people found that element difficult. The elements of the film, almost some people, addressing, make it almost laughable. It's just laughably poor how much he misses it, Aronosfky, and I don't think it's laughably poor. But I do think it's underdeveloped in a way that like I said, it sets you up for deeper criticisms about the representation of the traumas that you're presenting on the screen.
Yeah.
Trauma can make people like that. It can make people so angry and unreasonable, and it can make people say the most horrible things.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily untrue.
Yeah.
But it's the way that they're framed and the way that it is used that is the problem, and it makes it unbelievable for me.
Yeah, no, I think it doesn't explore the way that what's happened in Charlie's past has affected the other characters enough. I mean, it does touch on it quite a lot, but like you say, the way that they approached it was too much in his favour, perhaps, and that's why I've had this kind of. That's why I was so empathetic towards his character, and it does kind of fray a little bit.
There's just bits as well, like when he goes outside and the guy that's been really friendly to him sees him coming out and he's like appalled by him,
Oh yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I just think, I just don't know what the point of that is, really. I mean,
that kind of came and went, didn't it? There was no resolution to that at all. I thought they were going to get to know each other. And that was maybe quite a nice sweet ending.
No chance.
Yeah, no. Briefly, we're coming up to quite a significant portion of time spent on this now, but I just wanted to ask about how well you thought the film handled its treatment of vices, and specifically, people enabling them. So I'm talking about the character, the nurse handing him food all the time, and also you could kind of argue that Charlie is handing over, the financial benefit to his daughter as well, and that's kind of potentially a vice, and just like that kind of
interesting
idea.
Well, I mean, that brings up a whole.
It's a new discussion.
But I mean, I think at the end of the day, I guess in her character's mind. I mean, I'm trying to get into the mind of a character that I don't know here, but who is she to stop him from doing it? Yeah, that's because it's disempowering, isn't it? A disempowering choice.
Yeah, and also,
I mean, a lot of people would feel very strongly about that, would say on the opposite side of the fence. I'm not saying they're wrong either.
Yeah, no.
But I personally think that is it her call to disempower him, the choice to not do that, to not be that way, to not, even if it is self-destructive to some extent, is it her call?
Yeah, and ultimately it's not.
It's not a call. It's his choice. No. The tragedy within the fact that he wants to do that, I think, if explored more meaningfully, could have maybe added an interesting element, a deeper element to that.
I really thought that was one of the things the film was lacking, was just an exploration of why she keeps handing him this sort of junk food that's killing him, and also. Yeah, why didn't they touch on that more?
Would he be happier if she didn't? Would he be happier if she was like, no, you're gonna eat celery and go for a walk? At the end of the day, like, it's not just a quick fix to stop that. You know what I mean? And I think again, it speaks to that unnuanced approach that people, and that will encourage strong opinions from either side of the fence.
I think so. Yeah,
and some people would say it was unethical to allow someone to entertain this vice to the point of self-destruction, but it's deeper than just a vice. This isn't like having like sneaking a bar of chocolate on the way home from work, which I do regularly. It's it's a psychological condition, and it's deeply rooted in you.
Yeah,
the trauma has rooted that deep in with you.
Yeah. So
I think sometimes there's a tendency, again, speaking way out of my sort of personal and professional boundaries here, but. There's a tendency for people to sort of obscure that and ignore that, and just approach it from a position of logic.
Yeah.
But a mind that is impacted by trauma isn't concerned with logic.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just think that what she's doing in a way, on the face of it, it's pretty destructive. Yeah. But is it evil? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Is it reasonable? Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like
she keeps saying, she says multiple times, Charlie doesn't want to be saved. So I think she's kind of connected to him to the point where she understands his sort of need for self-destruction.
Because they're sharing the trauma. They're sharing the trauma of someone they both love dearly.
Yeah.
And they're connected by that trauma.
Yeah.
So there might be an interesting area of exploration there. Again, keep saying it. Had the film done it better?
Yeah.
But no, I that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I just thought of it. I just remember that being quite like an interesting topic which wasn't fleshed out enough. There you go.
Indeed. How does it stack up to his other films?
There's a number of his other films that I hold in quite high regard.
Yeah, because I know you're quite a big fan, aren't you?
Yeah, big fan of The Fountain.
Yeah, I like The Fountain.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
Big fan of. I like Requiem for a Dream a lot. Actually, I've seen it like 3 or 4 times.
Have you?
Yeah,
Managed it 3 or 4 times.
Other people say, a lot of people say, it's a one-watch film, isn't it? Like The Wrestler, fine. I actually think it's one of his weaker ones. I loved Black Swan. I thought Black Swan really won me over. A bit slightly flawed, like all of his films, but that was decent. Noah. A lot of people didn't like Noah. I didn't mind it. I thought it was. I thought there was a really good sequence in the middle, which effectively combined religion and science.
Yeah.
And it was a really smart little sequence, and I actually don't remember an awful lot else.
Okay.
So that sequence alone, I was like, yeah, it's a good film, that. Shut up, Hannah, it is good. We're watching it. What about you? What your...
I've always... I don't know, like, I feel like Aronosfky, for me, is someone that I like, but it's hard to not acknowledge the areas of his filmography that you can see why people... have issues with his films.
I forgot to mention Mother, another film which I
didn't get to see. I know I said last week I would, but I didn't.
I think Mother is even less subtle than The Whale.
Fucking hell.
But somehow it actually... I mean, it's more visually striking, Mother, or I should say Mother, because it's got an exclamation mark at the end. That's a joke by Mark Commode. Just realised. Cut it out. Anyway. And it is abstract enough in the way that it tells the story, although it is like just a big, huge allegory for a really well-known biblical story. Yeah, I quite like it.
I mean, I think with Aronofsky, you have to just sort of accept that he isn't going to, like we alluded to earlier, he isn't going to be subtle. No. He isn't really interested in that. He's got things that he's fascinated by, and he will explore them in the way that he always has, which is overt.
Yes.
And that, people's mileage will vary with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think this film stacks up amongst his best. I mean, I obviously Requiem for a Dream. I've only seen it the once.
Yeah.
I quite liked The Wrestler. I mean, The Wrestler was a film I watched like in sort of my fledgling days as a film proper film fan.
Right,
so
okay, yeah.
Maybe I need to revisit it.
There's some pretty obvious Christ metaphors in it.
Oh, of course. Of course. Yeah, I don't know where it fits, but I ultimately I just think it's a bit disappointing, and I can see a lot of the criticisms to the film are merited on the basis of that inability to explore things in a sort of meaningful and nuanced manner.
I think you're right. I don't know. He's got a weird way of winning me over a little bit.
That's fair enough. Yeah.
Strange.
I think you really put it really nicely about the idea of unsubtlety, if done right, in your eyes. If done right, it can really envelop you. And I think that speaks to a lot of films that operate like that.
Yeah.
Because I'm going, subtlety, but there's an argument for both sides. I guess.
Yeah. I guess
That's so Switzerland, isn't it?
I just let my guard down with films like this sometimes, and I think I like doing that.
We all need films like that, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nice,
good. Well, cheers. Outro.
Questing the cinematic void.
There we go then. Getting longer each episode.
Yes.
And it's not hubris. It's just, we waffle on.
Growing confidence in the medium, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe it is a bit hubris then.
Who knows? Yeah.
So next week, we alluded to it last episode, but we are still going to go ahead with our episode on the Fabelmans.
Yes.
It will be an episode conducted by not 2, but 3 stout men. Alfie's going to be back for that episode. Long-time listeners remember him. He's got a lovely voice.
He does. Eloquent and true.
Like being sliced with a velvet knife.
Oh.
And he'll be doing the slicing in the next episode.
I can't wait.
We also have mentioned before, I'm going to say it again
Yeah.
for some reason. An episode about Disney.
Yes, yeah, I'm looking forward to that one as well.
So we're gonna work on that and try and get those out to you.
Mm.
You know, in our usual bi-weekly format.
Perfect. Yeah. So next week, Fabelmans, and talking about the semi-autobiographical film.
Yes.
From, I'm gonna just want to pre-warn people. I always seem to manage to shoehorn a Danny Boyle film into these podcasts, and next week's will be no different.
Predator 2.
Yeah.
Somehow
Danny
for
Boyle's
me.
Predator 2.
I'm going to try and shoehorn that in as well. Yes, have a lovely weekend.
Nice.
It's funny, I always say lovely weekend, but people might listen to this when it's not the weekend. I thought that the other day.
Oh, that's all right.
Fuck it. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you in the next one.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.